And it's about 11 minutes now before the hour, and we're going to close out this hour's edition of the Experts Program with a return visit, an encore performance by Luis Alvarez. How about that? Given performance.
2-in-1.
There you go. So kind of a bookend on the program. And Luis, good morning to you. How you doing?
Good morning. How are you?
I'm fine. So we're going to talk a little bit here about cars today, which is kind of interesting because the start of the racing season is happening over at Laguna Seca. Is this their first big event of the year?
It is. It's the first major race of the year. There's this one and then a whole series of races throughout the summer and into the fall, and it all culminates on the third weekend in September with the return of the Indy car races to Monterey.
Now, the Indy cars, have they become a kind of a big deal again, or they waned a little bit there for a while?
Yeah, they're a huge deal, and they have an immense following. And we have the distinct honor, I guess you would say, of being the culminating race for their season, which means that it's a championship race, right? So as these guys race throughout the country, they earn points, and then typically several of them are within striking distance of each other, and so the final race really becomes a key to winning the championship. So I expect it's going to be very well attended and get a lot of hype. It's going to be a couple of the races are actually going to be televised on NBC.
Oh wow!
So we're going to get a lot of, including the IndyCar race. So we're going to get a lot of press, a lot of people. But that's actually one of the reasons that the Jazz Festival, for the first time in its history, moved their Jazz Festival weekend to the fourth weekend in September this year instead of the third, because they just the influx of people for the Indy races had already flooded the hotels, and and it was just going to add a whole dimension of chaos.
Wow!
And so they decided, hey, let's be smart about this and move it to the fourth weekend, and it's going to be a successful Jazz Festival. It's just going to be a week later.
I remember when I volunteered out at Laguna Seca back in the 90s, and this was when the Indy cars were really the penultimate event of the year, and we were very fortunate at that time. This is before the track in Fontana was built, but in those days, Laguna Seca was the very last race of the season in the IndyCar series, and that meant that the top drivers were there. If anybody they needed some points to be able to get into the top 5 or the top 3, or maybe even to finish in first. They wanted to be at Laguna Seca. The fans wanted to be at Laguna Seca. And we would have just the biggest crowds for the IndyCar weekends. They were incredible. And then when they opened Fontana, they made Fontana the last stop on the tour the following weekend. And that affected our attendance a little bit. But the thing that really, really ended up hurting the IndyCar series was when the two organizations split off, right? When the Indy 500 people came up with their Indy series, and then there was the traditional Indy series, and half the drivers went to one circuit, and the other half of the drivers went to the other circuit, and that made it really, really tough. And because there was so much fighting between the two organizations that they were not paying attention to the fact that NASCAR was cleaning their clock. And so it hurt the popularity of the sport in the U.S. for a while, but I'm glad to see that it's coming back.
Oh, yeah, and it's going to be a big weekend, but hey, we're just getting started.
Yeah.
Although, speaking of cars, there was a really interesting development this week. Ford announced that they were going to be investing in a new plant in, I think it was Michigan. And it's a plant to build driverless cars.
Really?
So yeah. So it's Ford has been known to be kind of at the forefront of the car technology and developing what future purchasers want, and they see that the future looks like a lot like driverless cars. So they've just announced this new facility, and they're going to be building it in Michigan, and by 2021, so only a couple of years away, they expect driverless production cars to come out of the assembly line. So it's a really interesting development.
It's also the first thought that comes to mind is that the auto companies have all this excess capacity, and you wonder why they can't take an existing plant and retrofit it for this new project, why they need to end up building a new plant somewhere else.
That's a really good question, and that question was asked of not of the Ford CEO, but of the GM CEO.
Mary Barra.
I was watching a segment on CNBC, and he explained that the cost of retrofitting is so much higher than building a new plant from scratch because of all the old stuff that you have to remove. It's it's not just that you're going to go in there and clean out the equipment and bring in new equipment. It's just the facility itself has to be laid out differently. The newer technologies that, as you know, cars today are built largely by robots and by automation, and there's a lot fewer human beings involved, and every year that automation becomes more sophisticated and better. So if you're building a new car plant today, which like Ford, they're starting to build it today, but it's not going to be in operation for a couple of years. So you got to figure by the time that plant goes into operation in 2021, there'll be even newer, better technology that if they had started the plant in 2021 will make them more efficient and better production. So that's just the nature of the beast. It's easier to start from scratch than retrofitting.
And that goes across different platforms and many different businesses. When we moved the radio station from Sherwood Gardens out to Moffett Street back in November, when they first talked about the possibility of, can we retrofit where we are, and it was going to cost so much more to install the new equipment, a whole new system on top of what we already had, and take out all the old stuff, but then try and get the new stuff in place, we literally would have had to take the radio stations off the air for a period of time, and that's not practical at all. So the reality was you'd either have to build a new server room in the facility that you were at, or you just move to a new building completely and you build from scratch there, and that's what we ended up doing. So I understand that completely.
Yep, and so the Ford plant is interesting, and not only that it's producing driverless cars, but as you know, the entire landscape of car use and car production is changing. Last year, for example, was the first year during a booming economy where fewer cars were sold than the year before. So the number of vehicles that people are buying is declining. Some of it, some people attribute it to millennials who are kind of finicky about things. Others say, it has to do a lot with the disruption of Uber and Lyft and all those ride share services that now make owning a car, not having a car, not that big a deal because you can get whatever car you want. And so what a lot of the car manufacturers are looking towards is trucks, because those are still popular, SUVs, because those are still popular, and fleet cars, because they see a future. Ford in particular sees a future where their number one customer isn't going to be you and me. It's going to be Uber, or it's going to be Lyft, or it's going to be some other car sharing service that's going to be buying a fleet of vehicles and a fleet of driverless vehicles that they can equip their market with.
Interesting. Well, the smart dealers are going to be those that try and get into the fleet sales, because that's always a good market to be in, although there's only room for a certain number of players. I remember years ago there was a Ford dealership in Watsonville, Marty Franich Ford. I don't know if you remember that name. And I was up there one time, and I noticed, I was actually talking to Rocky, who owned the business, and I said, truth be told, it doesn't look like you guys move a lot of cars here at the dealership. And he said, well, we don't. Our business is fleet. We're the biggest fleet dealer in the U.S., and we sell cars all over the country for fleet sales. That's where we make our money. Just, having the cars on the lot is a nice thing, but we don't, our bread and butter isn't the cars here on the lot, which I thought that was kind of interesting.
Yeah, and that's not that unusual. Fleet sales are big, and you look at the way the tax laws have changed in the last few years to encourage more of those kind of things for every kind of industry, including farming and hospitality, and you're seeing more and more fleet vehicles out there, vehicles with those logos on there. Yeah.
The interesting thing too about the drop in sales is prices have gone up as well, and on one of our early programs this morning between 7 and 9, we had the cruise control program on the FM, and the guys were talking about the fact that they see one of the reasons for the drop in auto sales domestically is the rising price of a new car. And in a lot of respects, a decent car to buy is around $36,000 today.
Absolutely, yeah. I mean, the inverse of the problem of selling fewer cars is that the fewer cars that you are selling, you're selling for more. So actually, the revenue is going up, but you're just doing less volume.
Right, exactly. And for a lot of people, this didn't count the used market. A lot of people are looking at late model used cars as an option because they can be had for maybe two-thirds the price of a new car. Like a 2015 Honda Accord would go for two-thirds the price of a 2018, and it's a very good car, especially if it's low mileage. So,
absolutely, yeah, makes sense.
Well, interesting stuff. Well, Louis, we've got the clock bumping up against us here for 11 a.m. in the news, but I want to thank you for joining us for the second edition of Tech Talk with Louis Alvarez. Enjoy the races this weekend.
I will. I'm heading over there right after you and I get off the phone.
All right, AlvarezTG.com on the web, at AlvarezTG, the Twitter handle, and Louis, the toll-free number for the I-Team.
Give us a call at 866-78-I-TEAM. That's 866-784-8326.
All right, thanks, Louis, and look forward to talking to you again on Monday.
Yeah, enjoy the weekend.
You too.